السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Thank you. Welcome everybody to this pre-conference workshop on Islamic bioethics. There will be people filtering in, but I'm glad you made it and collected your seats up in front, so I can then call on you, and the rest stragglers can stay in the back. So today we're starting, as we mentioned, a little bit late, but we're going to try to keep on time because I know this evening that we have a very, very stimulating program for you. So in any case, if you don't know me, my name is Aasim I Padela. I'm the director of the Initiative on Islamic Medicine here at the University of Chicago. This is actually our third year that we're doing an intensive Islamic bioethics workshop. This year is the smallest, however, so it's only 3 hours. It started 3 days, then we did 2 days, and now we're to 3 hours. So that means that we're going to try to compact a lot of stuff in these next 3 hours so that you can have an introduction to the field. So with that, I'm going to try to keep on time and begin. Those are my only preliminary comments. There's a few housekeeping things. I'm sure you all registered and you got your things. So if you need to get coffee, you see that's back there. You got your boxed lunch. You can eat in this room. The other thing is that in your packets, there are mandatory evaluations. So for those of you who are just here for the pre-conference, you'll need to return that to the staff at the desk. For those who are here throughout the entire conference, you can wait and give that back at the end of the third day, inshallah. Those who are getting CME, they will need to turn those in. If you miss this opportunity, then you will not be able to get CME. So please, you've paid for that, so don't waste that opportunity. So that's basically it. Are there any questions logistically before I start the conversation? No? Great. So bismillah. So we'll start. So the Initiative of Islamic Medicine, for those who don't know, sits at this junction between the seminary and the academy and the Muslim community and the healthcare system. And as you all know, that we conduct empirical research on American Muslim health, where we try to situate the values and beliefs of the Muslim community within the context of the larger healthcare system, particularly around the ways in which the religious ideas and values inform the health and healthcare seeking behaviors of Muslim patients, and that might produce healthcare disparities in the population. And then we try to voice to the healthcare system ways through policy interventions and the cultural accommodations they can meet the needs of Muslim patients. On the other side, we sit between the seminary and the academy. You're actually situated right at that place. The medical school campus ends here. Divinity School is across the street. So you're at that junction between the seminary and the academy, where our focus is on the aspect of Islam, how Islam is lived and understood by seminarians who are bringing forth the inherited canon of the tradition, and how Islam is understood and studied by academicians who want to think about it in terms of a sociological system as well as a theological system and framework. So our process here, or our goal here, is to have multidisciplinary engagement and have conversations between different stakeholders such that we can all translate concepts from one field to another. And this entire weekend we focused on that. The plenaries are focused on having interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary conversations so that we leave with some enhanced literacy around particularly the moral dimensions of medicine, but also this weekend about the epistemological frameworks of Islam and medicine. So today, in these 3 hours, we want you to leave with having gained some conceptual literacy in the Islamic portion of Islamic bioethics. I mentioned that we've had 2 different workshops. We have focused a bit on the bioethics portion and those as well, but these 3 hours don't suffice to touch on that spot, so I'll let you think about going into other courses and thinking about how to conceive the field of bioethics. We'll concentrate on the Islamic part today, and I want you to leave here equipped with some tools for researching and applying Islamic verdicts, Islamic moral frameworks to the ethical challenges in medicine. Okay, so this part, and if those of you who have attended my lectures before, is going to be interactive. I often like to have interaction. I'm very tired, and so there's no interaction. I'm likely to not really be very engaged, and then you won't be engaged, so we won't get any benefit out of it. So we're going to have an engagement here, starting with this question. And the first question is, who needs an Islamic bioethics? Everybody. Why? Well, if you can speak louder, I don't think everybody can hear.
As patients you need it, as consumers you need it, as administrators of medicine, etc. you need it.
For what purpose?
Make sure that you're administering what the patient needs.
So you need an Islamic bioethics to, you said, to make sure you address what the patient needs. Okay. Other thoughts of who needs it? He said you mentioned three groups. He said patients, administrators of hospitals, yeah, who are consumers of medical care. So aside from patients, who would that be?
The healthy people are still trying to do something.
Okay, who have not yet interacted with the healthcare system. All right, other people have any thoughts? Sorry?
Physicians.
Physicians, okay. Which physicians and why?
There's a lot of physicians, for example, intensivists may do a lot with end-of-life care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that doesn't really have a consensus even in the medical field. And I think especially as Muslims, there may be some sort of guidance from our tradition in terms of decision making.
So you're mentioning another stakeholder, which Roger didn't mention. He said for providers, and providers because they want to live out their understanding of Islam in medical practice?
No, because I think there's certain ethical scenarios in the hospital in
Mm-hmm.
which there's a lot of variability. Depending
Okay.
if you get 10 providers in the room, you'll get sort of a different response from each one.
Uh-huh.
And I think if we're to consider Islam as a complete way of life, that includes also things like ethical decisions that have to be made when it comes to medicine.
Okay. All right, other thoughts? I'm just putting myself on timer, so go ahead. Yeah.
Chaplains?
Chaplains, why? How are you, by the way? Good to see you again. Go ahead, chaplains.
Yeah, because chaplains speak both to patients and to doctors who are also, most of them are non-Muslims.
Okay, and what would that Islamic bioethics help them do?
Sorry?
What would that Islamic bioethics help them do?
Well, it helps people with decision making and also helps them feel a little bit more, comfortable with their thought process and anticipation of their needs.
Okay, good. So we have identified, I've put some up here, but I think we've hit on almost all of these. There are many stakeholders, is the point, that might search for something that's called Islamic bioethics, which we haven't yet defined. I don't know if we can fully define it. But patients, on one hand, right, people who want, Muslim patients who want to have some concordance between the medical care they receive or interact with and Islamic regulations. Healthcare providers, you mentioned that. Religious leaders who could also be chaplains, right, who want to advise clinicians and patients regarding biomedicine or provide spiritual support. Healthcare institutions, you mentioned that. And then sort of there are a whole host of policy and community stakeholders, right, for both within the community and outside the community who might search for some Islamic bioethics guidance. The problem space that we're in is that Islamic bioethics is a newly created field, right, where we hope we're on the leading edge. It's a field of academic inquiry with all this interest, but there really is lack of clarity of what is the Islamic content on Islamic bioethics. Right? So what content qualifies as Islamic, right, which can mean you're labeling something, some activity, or some body of knowledge as Islamic. And that has implications for then when we think about an academic field, how are you going to research that field? Right? So once you identify and you label something as a body of knowledge or a system of practice or whatever it might be as Islamic, then the tools for researching that are going to be based on that definition of Islamic. And I think in the space that we're in, there's a lot of contestation around that. Okay? And then there's also, as I mentioned a little earlier, there is also questions about the scope and nature of bioethics itself, right? Whether it's a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary field, who are the content experts. So we're going to start thinking about this from a perspective, and this entire weekend, from the perspective of the Muslims engaging with modernity, right? Coming from a place of comfort, potentially, within their tradition, all right? A tradition that has a long lineage, but now they're faced with challenges from modernity. And while they might interact with it, there is some distance, both intellectually, right, and psychologically with modernity. And that complicates the notion of an Islamic bioethics. So as social scientists, we're going to start with thinking about sociological frameworks for thinking about Islamic bioethics. And you know, many of us think, let's just start with Google. You know, it used to be that you go to a library search engine first as a scholar, but now many of us just go to Google, and they go to Google Scholar. But in any case, here's Google. This is a couple days ago, and I just put the search term in Islamic bioethics. And the goal, what's going to happen over the next few slides, is we're going to, and this is not in your slide set, we're going to identify individuals, because largely I know most of these people. Some of them are sitting in this room, by the way. So I have to be careful what I say. But we're going to identify individuals for their disciplinary expertise. Okay? And then at the end of the talk, I'm going to kind of give you my shtick about what the limitations of that disciplinary expertise might be. All right? That's your money's worth. Who can't ask someone ask me? I'm gonna get money. That's the money's worth. It's not in your packet. I'm going to tell you that's my, and then don't go outside this room. All right. So here we go. So we have Wikipedia, which is everybody and their brother writes on Wikipedia. So there's no disciplinary expertise there. Okay, that's the first hit. Then you get a workshop a couple years ago, another workshop of ours, and then you have sort of Islamic medical and scientific ethics, bioethics research. So this is a what this represents actually is a library database that was funded by the Qatar Foundation to Georgetown University to create a scientific database on Islamic medical bioethics or scientific ethics. Okay, so that's not an individual; it's a body of knowledge. Meaning, it's a bit a library hosting source a lot of different materials. Okay, so the first thing you get out of all this, here we go, something that's potentially scholarly, is a paper in PubMed called Bioethics for Clinicians, right, written by Abdullah Dar. Okay, does anybody know Abdullah Dar? Okay, who's Abdullah Dar? Okay, but that's fine, but do you know of him? What is his disciplinary expertise?
So he's a physician.
Okay.
And has written a lot of material on
Okay. So one stakeholder, physician. There you go. So physician wrote. Then you have this PowerPoint that's written by, so this is the Catholic Educational Office in Sydney. I actually know who wrote this. This is a PhD researcher. Okay, he was doing some work on Islamic Bioethics. He joined with this PowerPoint. Next, you have a PDF of a book, Islamic Bioethics. This is by Berna Arda. Okay, who knows Berna Arda? You don't say anything because you know all these people. Yeah, go ahead. No? Why don't you give us an idea? Who's Berna Arda? No? Okay, you don't have to say anything. So Berna Arda is a scholar of bioethics in Turkey who's also a physician. She's a bioethicist, and she has I believe she has a law degree as well. Oh, I'm sorry, no, she has a PhD as well. Okay? So that's that. Then you have a beginner's guy. Okay. I don't know who wrote that actually. And then there is a paper here. Actually, it's a part of a blog. You can ask Professor Sachedina about this because it's in his blog, Condemning Maternities at Notre Dame, by Abdulaziz Sachedina. So who knows Abdulaziz Sachedina? What disciplinary expertise he has? Go ahead.
So he's an academic.
Mm-hmm.
So has a lot of experience in Islamic law, particularly Shiite jurisprudence, and he's done a lot of work on Islamic bioethical perspectives and juridical reasoning from
Right.
Shiite perspective.
Yes, so as she said, he's a PhD of Islamic comparative, I think, law, comparative law, I believe. But he has a PhD in Islam, and he's working in Islamic studies. His perspective is one from largely from the Shiite tradition, but he has other frameworks that he uses to think about bioethics. So that's that. Okay. So far we identified a physician with PhD maybe, and then a PhD. All right. Okay. So we go to our library here at the University of Chicago, and we look at the what's going on in the Islamic Bioethics. The first titles come up. You have a book, Islamic Bioethics, by Dariush Ategechi. Does anybody know him? Dariush did a PhD in comparative law, not a PhD, law, and he's currently in Europe. Okay, same book. Then you get Abdulaziz Sachedina. We talked about that. Then you have a book by someone who's in this room, Abu Fadl Muhsin Ibrahim. He's right there. So you all know him now. Okay, Jazakallah khair for coming. So I'll speak about him. So Abu Fadl Muhsin Ibrahim he's a now professor emeritus at the University of South. What is it? I can't say the word. Yeah. What he just said. Kuala Nuzul Natal. But he has a training as an alim at Darul Karachi, I believe. Yes? And also did a PhD at Temple University with actually one of my teachers way back when. So he comes from a seminary plus PhD perspective. Okay? Has been running this area a long time. And then you have a textbook of bioethics, which is, there's some chapters in that about Islamic bioethics. Okay, so do you add anybody? Or any disciplinary expertise on this slide? We're going to have a long day. We're going to have a long day. Come on.
Someone from seminary background.
All right, so we just added a specific, right, seminary background. Okay, good. Now we go to PubMed, right? So many of us are aspiring clinicians, are clinicians, and we think about Islamic Bioethics here. And, he just did this to irk me. But in any case, the first thing that came up 2 days ago is by a paper by Ibrahim Musa. All right? Just published. So I'll pick it up, asking about it. So, anybody know Ibrahim Musa? Go ahead.
He's an academic.
Disciplinary expertise, background. He's an academic, but academics are many different types and flavors. I'm an academic, I think.
Bump this one. I'll bump this one to someone else.
All right. Anybody want to offer? You, please.
PhD in religious studies.
And
That's everything.
the seminary training, right?
Yeah, he has mentors to train too. That's right.
Right. So,
Mentors as well.
right. So he's right. So he brings this academic perspective, has a PhD in religious studies, but then also has some seminary training. Then you have a paper by very good. Sundus. So Sundus and Ubada. So this is a group of individuals very well known to Muhammad Isa. Sundus, Ubada. This is statistician Siddiqa, and that's me. So Sundus and Ubada are medical students. All right, there you go. Then you have a paper by Marcia Inhorn. Anybody know Marcia Inhorn?
Social science.
Very good. So she's a social science anthropologist who studies Islamic societies, particularly around their uptake of technology. So we have added that expertise, potentially, or that discipline on this slide. Taylor Purvis is coming to this conference. You can ask her who she is, or you can look at your bio in there. So Taylor is a medical student. Next paper is by Nuruddin Isa. Isa. Anybody know this individual? PhD in Islamic Bioethics, I believe. Bioethical thought at the University of Malaya in Malaysia. Huh? I think it's Nuruddin Isa. And then you have a paper by Dr. Betty. Okay. And then lastly, you have a paper by a lot of authors. This is a group, actually. I'll tell you the group. It's the VLIM group in Australia that brings together PhDs. There's one. There's another. And individuals with seminary training. And they think about religious perspectives of bioethics. Okay. All right. So now we've gone through Google. We've gone through the University of Chicago Libraries. We've gone through the first page of PubMed. And is there anybody else in this conversation? We have identified 6 categories, I believe, at this point, of disciplines or intersectoral disciplines. Physicians, I'll put medical students underneath them. We said PhDs in Islamic law, religious studies. You added seminarians. You added social scientists. You added legal scholars. That's 5. Did we miss anybody? Okay. They haven't, and they're not on these databases yet, right? So policymakers. But what we went from was consumers to now producers of Islamic bioethics, right? So you have these categories of producers, okay? All right. So I will say there are a few people sort of are missing. So we do have seminarians who have, as you noticed in the slides I said, we have seminarians who are just participating in the academic enterprise, right? They have PhD and some alim training. But you have people who don't go that route, and they're just offering guidance to the masses, right, to the Muslim polity. So they might not write in those databases, but sometimes they do come up in Google when you look up some Islamic bioethics perspective. So does anybody know? You know everybody. Sheikh Muhammad ibn Adam al-Kawthari.
It comes from Leicester, where I grew up.
Yeah, yes. So she's a very important individual to know, I think. So she knows everybody. So that's good. So his training is? Yes, what's his training? He's mufti, right? Yeah, so he did not only did just seminary studies in terms of an alim degree, which is equivalent, I would say, in parlance, something like a master's degree, but he's got actually some legal training to issue verdicts, so the mufti degree, in the Darulum Buri over there. Okay, then you have, in other spaces, you have, this is not meant to be there, but it's a good book. You have organizations, right, that are also participating in authoring things on Islamic bioethics. This is one of the premier ones. It's the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, formerly very, very active, has gone to some quiescence. It's a body which brings together jurists and physicians, right, and they offer opinion papers around Islamic bioethics. So if you're in this space, this is a group that you need to know, all right? And so they also are, you can consider a producer. So I would call them, say, a medical fiqh academy, all right? Okay. So then you have, I think, when we talk about academics, and someone mentioned academics, there are a polyglot of different sorts of methodologies. You have Abdulaziz Sachidina, Dariosh here. This is Vard Chaim. That's Jonathan Brockup, and that's also Jonathan Brockup. So you have individuals who have PhDs in various disciplines, and they're applying their trade and their particular methodologies of their discipline to studying the phenomenon of Islamic bioethics. So they're not all one size fits all. Some have religious expertise, right, and religious studies expertise. Some have, as we mentioned, sociological, anthropological expertise. Others have different types of expertise, okay? But they're studying the phenomenon. So we have to think about them as well. So I mentioned now that we have many different consumers. I mentioned that there's contestation around what is the Islamic content of Islamic bioethics. I showed you that there are many different people involved in producing Islamic bioethics. So that gives you a sense of why there is confusion, right? Because everybody has their own disciplinary vantage point, right? And when the layperson, who I think is actually the most important consumer of an Islamic bioethics, right? Because they're the ones who have to make decisions of whether something is concordant or not with their value system, right? And then you can say after the patient, it might be then those who advise them, which might be physicians and other local religious leaders. You know, when they pick up something on Islamic bioethics from whatever source they look at, Google, paper, newsletter, whatever, someone gives them a book, you can understand the confusion that they're in. Because they might read one thing and say, well, this is what someone propounds or says, or here's how to think about it, and they might read something else, and then that person has a totally different take. So the field is one that is in construction presently, okay? And I think that when you think about Islamic bioethics, you have to notice some of the limitations of those who are writing, which is why I said make that list, and some of the methodologies that you use to find out what Islamic bioethics might be or Islamic bioethical perspective might be. And the one that we all know, we all love, right? The Sheikh Google phenomenon for religious studies, right? And so this is when you're studying online, the problem is that I think you should just read it. Just read it if you haven't read it before. I think you can't study religion from Google. You can't be your sheikh, but you should just read it. So basically, it's a sense of an elementary view of the discourse, right? That almost everybody can write about anything, and it can be trending on Twitter and go up on sort of some Google piece. But the issue is that there's a lot of stuff out there that's polemical, right? I'm not dating myself, but the fact is that when people used to invite you for talks, and you say, "How'd you find out about me?" They would say, "I read your paper." Now they say, "Oh, I saw a video of you on Google." Right? And that's a problem. I think that's a problem for us as a field. Okay, so let me sort of now talk. So that's the Google research phenomenon. I'm just going to hit on things. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Who's the author of that? You happen to know who wrote that?
I know the name from this website, but I don't know who that individual is personally. So I mentioned this idea of research from Google. Now I'm going to mention. And the reason I'm doing this is so I showed you the Google first, right? Then I showed you I showed you Chicago Libraries. Then I showed you PubMed. So now let's talk about PubMed. PubMed, Medline, is a place where many physicians go to seek guidance about how to practice medicine, right? Or might be ethical issues occurring in medicine. This is our primary resource, bibliographical database that we go to, right? When I'm going up for promotion, they say how many of your journal articles were indexed in PubMed. That's the only thing that counts. So it has a lot of weight within the medical academy. A friend of mine, Hassan Shanawani, he and Muhammad Hassan Khalil, this is from 2005 or 6. So he was interested in this field. He said, let me just look at what is out there on Islamic bioethics in Medline, in PubMed. So they did a search of 55 years of papers. They found, just using these two search terms with the mesh-associated terms, they found 146 papers that came up, right, from that database that has millions. So one thing it tells you that at this time, in these 55 years, very little writing, right, less than 3 papers a year. And this was the authors. So the authors, most of the authors, not most of this, but the most predominant place of authorship is from the Middle East, right, and then the United States. Okay. I'm sorry.
Papers all in English.
Yes. Well, no. The papers aren't. He didn't do it in English data. He did it without the English limitation. Here is the challenge, right? So of these 146 papers, only 11, right, less than 10% mention anything beyond a universal position on Islamic bioethics. So they'd say, brain death is permissible in Islamic law, and write a little piece about that. Organ transplantation is found to be permissible by the Surgical Academy. That's it. So of this group, only 11 mention anything more than one position, okay? And then only 5 mention anything about the concept of source of Islamic law. And for those who are here, obviously you all believe, or and I will communicate to you, or actually Sheikh Jawad will communicate to you in the next lecture if you don't believe this. But when you think about ethics in Islam, in the intellectual tradition, you have to at least give some credence to law. Right? And that might be the totality of what you think about. Ethical thinking does not reside all in law. But you can't discard of law in ethical thinking. Okay? And the fact that these papers don't mention anything about Islamic law or the concepts of source of Islamic law is a problem. Right? You all see why? So if you go here, the bias here should be readily apparent. Right? Now things have changed from 2005. That's the year I graduated medical school, so things must have changed. But in any case, things have changed since then. But there still is a problem of what's out there. Okay, so that's what they're writing. Now let me tell you what they're thinking. So this is a national survey that we did here at the initiative of American Muslim physicians. So we had surveyed the Islamic Medical Association of North America's membership, because we wanted to get people, Muslim physicians, who thought about themselves as Muslims first. So that is a national organization with, I think, over 3,500 members or so. We did a random sample of those physicians, and we wanted to see what their bioethical attitudes were, or their knowledge was. So this is their resource utilization in Islamic bioethics. I showed you some books. Most of them don't read any books. I showed you that some areas you might want to look at juridical opinions. They don't talk to jurists. And these specialized academies will bring together Muslim physicians and Islamic jurists. They never really read that. Okay? When you move on, you say, okay, well, who do you talk to imams, local imams? You need to go to the research literature because you have people right with you in your communities. Less than a quarter. And then you said, okay, well, do you talk to imams at all to help them? Because we know that imams have challenges in Islamic bioethics, or actually have challenges guiding people about healthcare. Almost never, right? No one. I don't think I have the slide. So, and when you ask them how familiar you are on Islamic bioethics, 85% said we're somewhat or very familiar with Islamic bioethics. 85%. So the challenge is that for many of us, right, you're here and so you have a sense of what you don't know, but they're not here. They have no idea what they don't know, right? They don't know what they don't know, and I think that becomes, and it's not necessary that you have to follow Islamic guidance or do anything, but other data, which I'm not showing you here, I don't have that slide as I was saying, I can show you data from Muslim patients who seek out Muslim physicians for that specific role, to be able to combine moral guidance from the tradition, right, and from medical perspective. And so I think that's a clear for us in the United States. I don't know what it is in South Africa, but in the United States that's a challenge. Go ahead.
What kind of samples are you looking at, Dr. Padela? How many people have you?
So we had 255, so 42% of the 650 or so sampled. Okay, so here's the summation of what that means, right? So we have a lot of people talking about Islamic bioethics, a lot of disciplines, but there's a lack of conceptual clarity on simple terms about what is right, what is wrong, what's corrupt, what's bad. And they all have their own definitions. They all think about things differently. And when you pick up the literature, often it misses the mark, right? The medicine, I showed you the example, physicians sometimes, and I'm a physician, so I'm not outing myself. But the point is problems occur when we think about medical issues, right? And others, if they don't talk to jurists, then the jurists cannot necessarily have a proper conceptualization of the bioethical problem at hand as well. So it's twofold. Okay, so this is the current state of discourse. Many different disciplines engage, right, with different goals and expertise. There's a silo problem with a little crosstalk. I mentioned this. The problem for researchers is that we don't have a central repository of material, right? So you might go to different places. That database from Georgetown, IMSI, might be a place you go. Maybe that has a lot of good, valuable material there. But it didn't exist before 2009. So where would you go before then? So now I want to ask you, since you're all in this room for some sense of learning about Islamic bioethics, with this background, who do you believe is an Islamic bioethics expert? Not the individual, but what disciplinary expertise do you think has a sense of predominance in Islamic bioethics, and what discipline wouldn't have a sense of dominance, right? So what is the orders of hierarchy? Any thoughts? Please. Okay. So they have so biomedical expertise. So that has an order of hierarchy. Okay, so that's one group, but they should have some sort of place in the structure. So where is that place in the structure? Go ahead. Uh-huh. So continue. So what does that mean?
So under the umbrella of Islam and tradition, then you would have any kind of Islamic or bioethics or any other type of science. But what's all encompassing has to be the concept of Islam first.
I'm with you. I think everybody's with you. But I'm going to continue to draw upon you for a little while. So let me just rephrase what I think you're saying. So we talked about orders of hierarchy in the discourse. That's what I'm asking about. Hierarchy in the discourse. In your mind, right? It's a discourse that's being created. So one individual said, well, the biomedical expertise should should be near the top, maybe. You didn't say the top, but I'm putting that in as speaking for him. You're saying that everything has to come under the umbrella of Islam, so you're being a subsidiary notion of biomedical expertise, that Islam comes first. But what Islam? What does that mean? That's why I was continuing to draw upon you. What does that mean?
The ideal person would be someone who has training both, and that would be, as the brother Alhamdulillah, as well as a bioethicist. I think it has to be in conjunction, but I still believe that when I say under the umbrella of Islam, that everything in Islam encompasses all sciences as well. So the development of bioethics can stem from, but it has to be coming from initially the whole concept of Islam.
Okay. All right. We'll ruminate over that. Please go ahead.
I think ideally, if someone had both expertise in Islamic jurisprudence as well as in medical bioethics, that person would be sort of at the top.
Okay. So we're still on these two areas. I'm sorry. I'm just going to go with the person behind you because they had their hands up. Please.
I'm just wondering if we really need a hierarchy because we've involved so many people in this talk and this discourse that I think what we need is collaboration because it's so hard to be, like medicine is already so specialized, you need to be such an expert to be a good physician. How can you also be an expert to like the highest level in Islam?
Very good. Interesting perspective. Very good. Very good. I'm going to go here, then you next. Please.
So I think regardless of where they come from, what background, as long as they're recognizably trained and licensed in some sort of way, where there's a permission given to practice either the Islamic perspective or the medical perspective. So, an Islamic bioethics expert would be someone who's given that qualification by somebody else. So I think there should be an authoritative recognition of this particular field.
Okay, very good. I like that too. Okay, I'm going to come back to those ideas in a second. You have the floor. Go ahead.
I don't think it should be so much a hierarchy between disciplines,
Uh-huh.
but more so a hierarchy within disciplines. Like, for example, certain issues in bioethics, like in vitro fertilization, you wouldn't defer to a radiation oncologist.
I see what you're saying.
And then the same thing with someone from a seminary background. There are scholars who spend more time and delve more into things like Aqidah and Creed, who may sort of, I guess, think about these things more, study these things more, what constitutes death, and so on and so forth.
I see. So good. So let me, for a moment, so you sort of are saying that we have bodies of knowledge, and that for each particular question or area, we have to draw upon different individuals within those bodies of knowledge. So you have medical science expertise, someone might know about some disease better, and therefore that influences the bioethical discourse, and we might want them, not someone from a different area. And similarly on the Islamic side. You mentioned this idea of collaboration. Do you concur with what he's saying, this idea of collaboration?
Yeah, I think for different issues you can involve different experts, I think, and have them communicate and work together.
Okay. And so then he would say, then you make some authorization structure for all these individuals?
As much as practically possible.
Okay, all right. I'm going to, go ahead, please, Arman. Go ahead.
It's not clear to me that there's a social role for bioethicists within the community that somebody can bridge both of those functions.
It's not clear. So what would that social role be, do you think? There isn't one, or that, so there is no functionary, so there's no need, there's no need, so there's no functionary? Or do you think there's no functionary, so there's no need? Right? Because in professionalization, we have this all the time. Where you professionalize something because, right, then you develop a need because that's professionalized.
But I think that's the tension between then Islam and modernity.
Very good.
In that we've created this role of the bioethicist in modern medicine because of the lack of a cohesive moral stance and having to negotiate that.
Very good.
And so I don't know that that within a traditional Islamic culture that you would have a bioethicist because it's in that cultural context it's not modern in the way they'll
Just like,
see as modern.
yes, just like chaplaincy, right? I think this is, so I think that perspective is incredibly important for us, right? We start off talking about modernity, structures of modernity. So now you have a chaplain, you got to figure out is it authorizing the body to make chaplains. You have a bioethicist, we still don't know what the bioethicist is or does, but then you have to figure out some structure. But is there really some need for that in the sense of, are we pushing upon the faith something that doesn't exist? And I think Sheikh Jawad is going to talk about that in terms of conceptual categories. Are we putting, I'm putting a lot of pressure on you, so I'm going to, but right, the idea of the conceptual categories, right, that are placed upon the tradition. Please, your last comment, then I'm going to try to, yeah. Yeah, and I think that I hear what you're saying. I think that the point is that would it be that there would be no need for a non-community expert, right? So in the community, there might be things that are resolved at the community level. There might be someone who resolves these tensions or questions of people, but there's nothing for the institution to do about that. There's no institutional need. There's no policy need, right? So if you say the bioethicist phenomena as a bioethicist that we create in the academy, maybe there would be none. There would be someone at the community level who resolves those issues. There might be some spiritual support person that does something else, but there might not be a field of bioethicists who say, I'm Islamic bioethicist, who've gotten a PhD or whatever else in Islamic bioethics. Maybe that's putting upon a tradition that doesn't have these similar sort of categories, one that we have to create one. I think that's what your point was, I believe. But we have to grapple with this. I mean, I'm going to leave that tension. There's a tension. We have to think about that in our own lives. So some of you mentioned this, and I don't think I have to belabor it, but sometimes we forget, and this is right, that bioethicists are all different sorts of flavors and types, right? So when we talk about the field of bioethics, we have to also understand that there is not a uniform idea of what a bioethicist is, right? Even within the academy. Okay, so I said we're going to create a list, and we're going to go through strengths and limitations. That's your money's worth, which is not on the slide, right? So I'm just going to speak. And then I think I have about 10 minutes to get into some other concepts, if I can. And then we'll turn over to Sheikh Jawad. So we have that list. You tell me, and I'm going to tell you. That's how it's going to work. You say a person, and I'm going to give you my 2 cents of the potential strengths and limitations of that discipline in this conversation. Physician. So as a physician. So the physician goes through training to become a physician. Does not go through training to become anything else. And in a modern day, physicians, largely, medical education is globalized. Okay? So you have very similar curricula being taught in different places. So a doctor who is in Malaysia, right, working in an IVF clinic, has a very similar day to one who's at the University of Chicago. They have studied similar books. They've studied similar sort of techniques, right? And when they're practicing medicine, they could even potentially, if the certification body is allowed, they can say, just, I'm going to do this clinic here. It's the same thing. Yes, they will face challenges of the population that are different, culturally, religiously, but their training and their thinking and their medical culture is very similar. So what does that lead to? That leads to a problem in many ways, in different ways. So here, let me give you one. One problem is identification of the problem, ethical problem. So I would argue that in medicine, we not only learn medicine, we learn the ways to adjudicate moral problems in medicine, right, to solve them. And we also learn ways to identify problems in medicine. That there is a cultural framework within which the education is delivered. And once you transplant that educational curricula, that cultural framework comes along with it, right? So you might see problems in terms of autonomy and beneficence and whatever else, right? And not in terms of other things. You might identify problems where maybe don't exist. There's a lot of myths in Muslim societies with people going and saying, I want to go teach bioethics in Nigeria, whatever, I'm just using a country, right? And I assume these are the sorts of problems they have around X, Y, Z. But when you do the sociological work, they have different ways of thinking about things, and they have different problems that you didn't think about as a physician. So the gaze is somewhat limited and restricted in terms of bioethical problems, in terms of their approaches, right? They have certain conceptual tools that they bring out, right? So you'll see papers in the bioethics literature, my favorite one, the 4 principles in Rumi's work, right? Well, that's great. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but right, we'll find the 4 principles in Rumi's work from the 12th century. So does Rumi talking about principlism? I don't think so. But we will find these sorts of analogs. And at the same time, we'll say, oh, look, they don't have the sense of shared decision-making, right? They don't have autonomy, right? Women's right, whatever. I mean, they'll talk, and you'll create this problem structure that is driven from a different vantage point. Okay, 1. 2, physicians, right, in this Islamic bioethics piece, in our current context, right, I will just tell you that they don't have any training in bioethics either in the Muslim community. Okay? So oftentimes in the minority context, I'm speaking to particularly, you get placed in positions, right, because you're the only person who can speak. I'm here because I'm placed in a position, right? I don't necessarily have all the knowledge to give you. And that perpetuates itself, where you have this idea of experiential, I'm sure there is experiential knowledge, I believe in it, but you become the person, and then you become the authority. So in our survey of Muslim physicians here, 2 people had any advanced degrees in Islamic law. 2, period, right? And or had actually studied, and you saw they don't study anything else largely. So that creates a problem for them to do what? To actually meet the needs of people. Because they will claim potentially, or not they will claim, but they'll be put in positions where they have to give answers, where they might not have the conceptual tools to do so from the Islamic sort of lens. And in minority communities, they might be placed in positions where they actually have to make decisions, right? As a member of the ethics committee potentially, but have no training in bioethics. So now, not only don't you know the Islamic sort of piece, you don't know the bioethics piece, and therefore, where are you speaking from? Right? I'm talking about myself, so it's problematic. But anyway, so those are 2 ways, right? So the Islamic portion, the bioethics portion, right? The content expertise might be difficult. And then the other thing I'll say is that as physicians, we have a culture. As I said, it's all globalized, right? But we have a culture of, as physicians, we have a certain representation of the culture, in the Muslim culture, right? So many of us will say, oh, we can only be doctors or lawyers or whatever else it is. And the physician is like this, white knight, right, in the community. And so they don't become tested to think deeper. Surface level answers are sufficient because it comes from their mouth. That's it, right? And that leads to a problem because you only develop ways to adjudicate moral problems through conversation and discourse. And through, right, in the seminary, you have jadal. I mean, you have this sense of make your argument. When do they have to make arguments about moral issues? Very rarely in the community. Okay? All right. Who else? Sorry. Who else? Next.
Islamic theologian.
I don't know. A theologian? Be more specific.
Jurist.
Okay. Islamic jurists are dependent for a sense of medicine on physicians. Right? So حكم الشيء فرع تصوره, right? So the ahkam, the decision upon a thing, right, is dependent upon the conceptualization of the problem space. That conceptualization is given to them by the questioner, right, and the expert, meaning the questioner may be the patient, the expert being the physician. So they are, in some senses, recipients of whatever they say. And the way you frame questions can lead to different answers, right? So we talked about orders of hierarchy. We talked about where it comes from, but I think in one sense you have to recognize that jurists actually, in some senses, are subsidiary to, right? They're subsidiary to physicians and patients because they're the ones who are giving them the conceptualization of the problem at hand. They're responding to them. Okay? So if you ask the question a certain way, let's give an example. Organ transplantation. The question was, faced to fiqh academies, what do we do with people, right, who have, for all intensive purposes, have died? And you've already said they've died in certain ways, or some people have said they've died, right? And we have no way to recover consciousness for them, but yet we can preserve their organs. And there are people who are dying next door who don't have kidneys, right? Or forget about kidneys. They need cornea to see, right? And the cornea will happen when we can take the cornea even after they're dead and like they're going to be buried, right? There's a certain answer that you're going to get, right? And you're framing it as a benefit issue for population, no harm issue here. You're going to say, can I open up your body, right? When I think that, can I open up your body and take out an organ and give it to someone else, right? Because I think that you're going to die in a couple of days. What do you think the answer is going to be then? So, right? You frame the question, you get the answer. I said the jurists don't know what they're talking about, but actually you frame the question. Okay, so that's one. Two, jurists are attempting to resolve the situation, right? So we're talking about the mufti, let's just say mufti, is attempting to resolve the situation a mustafti has, right? So they might go to certain lengths to do that because they ultimately don't want the person who's asking the question to be falling into sin. And somehow they have to figure out a way, if they can, to provide them a course of action that will help keep within the bounds of the community. And that reasoning and those sources that they go to and the way they develop their ethical reasoning might sometimes be seen as not the most logical way of reasoning things. Logic is not the means by which you adjudicate, but people might contest that. Okay? But the point is that they're trying to resolve a situation a person has and keep them within the bounds of the faith and not falling into sin. So that ethos, right, can lead to fatwa seem very interesting, right? Like the golden fatwa, right? Who is it? Well, I'm forgetting blanking now. Let them drink because they won't kill us. What's the reference? But right, it was Ibn Taymiyyah, I believe, or one of his students. I forgot what it is. But the point was, like, these Tartars, they're coming in or whatever, they're going to kill us, right? And they want to become Muslim. They're not a Muslim, but they drink, right? Let them drink. They won't kill us, right? Because they're going to drink. So I mean, I forgot the exact point. But the point is, it might seem very strange, but the point is trying to resolve some situation. Okay, so that's 2 for jurists. Okay, another group, and then another group. You guys just like jurists and physicians? All right, yeah. Yeah, I think the problem there is, as I think Armand was saying, like, who is a bioethicist, right? What training do they have? Right. Well, yeah, what training do they have? So that leads to, we're struggling with this in the academy, right? So I might apply for a job. They say, well, you don't have these sorts of types of training. We want this clinical bioethicist. Someone else might be working as a bioethicist for, the VA. And they're like, well, you need to have some policy training to do bioethics in the VA, right? So there might be different ways of thinking about what the bioethical situation space is. And you have to fill various needs. Or we're working at a transnational pharmaceutical company. You need to have some legal training to be a bioethicist for our firm, right? So you get this very different types of expertise. And the question becomes, each one of those has this particular lens and disciplinary sort of vantage point. At the same time, we're talking about Islam and bioethics. What do you mean by Islam? Like, where is their Islam coming from? So I think we just have this challenge that they might have certain ways of thinking about things. They might be a social scientist, and that's certain ways, but then they might not have Islamic content to help bring out normative values in the conversation. So, okay, we're going to move on. So I can give Sheikh Jawad this time. So, when I think about, this is just my own, I have to sort of, this is one, maybe generation one of some thinking about what an Islamic bioethics would be. And in my mind, we haven't gone through this, but you'll see by the end of the talks given by Sheikh Amin and Sheikh Jawad, that I think there are some inputs from our tradition, intellectual tradition, into thinking about the matter of bioethics. And they might be sources from Islamic law, from what I'm calling moral theology, because I'm taking Professor Fadl's view on that. But in any case, sort of fiqh here, and what Elizabeth Sartell will tell you all about that from her paper. But in any case, right, there are some inputs from our tradition, thinking about ethics, which need to be at least to recognize when we're conceptualizing the problem at hand. Okay, you might say, I want to use virtue ethics or whatever else it might be, but you can't ignore at least these 3. And then you have discursive partners. So you have to think about the issue in terms of clinical practice, right? Clinical practice, and I'm just going to say this, we often forget this, that there is a code and culture to clinical practice. Certain things you don't do, and you don't do that way, you're not taught to do that way, and the patient would think that's odd to do it that way. Oftentimes, that's not ever present in juridical thinking about Islamic bioethics. So what are the norms of your discipline? How do other people and colleagues, particularly minority situations, think about that? And in some places, that might be actually very important, right? Are you a physician who is seen as a actor of the state, and a state actor? Or are you seen as an autonomous agent? The way you think about conscious problems or conscientious objection will be very different depending on your characterization of who the physician is in your society. You have social science, right, thinking about how we generate normative, or if we do generate normative value from studying people and societies. The medical science aspect, as someone mentioned here, right, that particular disease or that particular scientific challenge. Philosophy and bioethics, so you have to be in conversation. It's a field that's very interdisciplinary. You have to be in conversation with others, right, to sharpen your own reasoning. And then there's policy. So I think when you think about Islamic bioethics, you can't just say physician and jurist sit together and you're done. All right? We're so oftentimes just say physician, you're done. We say jurist, you're done. And now you say let's collaborate, but I think there's other people that need to be at the table as well. And we just have to have conversations over time, right? So you will learn a little bit about our working group that we did for 2 years. We sat together and thinking about our lexicon from our fields. Okay, so with that, I'm going to end. I will not, well, yeah, I think I should end. But I'm just going to show you a couple of terminological slides from my sense. This is my terminology. You can choose to adopt it or not adopt it, but this is how I think of the field. So I want you to cite me when you write about this. No, but because I think just for me, when I was entering the field, I was trying to figure out boundary points of how to think about things. So I'll give you this terminology. We'll end, if you want to take a 2-minute break after you can, and then Sheikh Jawad will speak. So he'll just take time to get all wired up. So Islamic bioethics, in my mind, when you think about the Islamic aspect, right, it has to be tied to the scriptural sources as well as the bearers of tradition, right? Meaning, as someone mentioned, the traditional ulama, in some sense, they're the standard bearers of the tradition. Now, I'm going to tell you a problem. One problem is for Muslims that sometimes they think the bearer of tradition creates the tradition. The standard bearer of tradition creates tradition. Now, that is true in a certain way, but it might not be true in other ways, right? So you have to think about this, right? So you have to think about Islamic bioethics is tied to the scriptural sources and the bearers of tradition. And there are 2 genres here, fiqh and adab, right? So you have that fiqh, we all know, and then this idea, there are many different streams of this, right, within our tradition as well, that are ways of thinking about becoming a better individual, right? So you can, as the classic example given is, you can legally, you can divorce a woman, marry a woman, divorce a woman, marry a woman, divorce a woman, marry a woman, divorce a woman, legally, right? Every second day, right? But women say there's some problem with that ethically, right? So you might think about there are other sources in our tradition to help us think about being the best individual, right? Being the best physician. And that's not just obeying the law. Okay, all right. Muslim bioethics is, so when I say Muslim, we use the term Muslim because I believe then the sources of study are Muslims, the sociological study of how Muslims respond to ethical challenges, right? And any Muslim, myself included, Islam's one input in the way that we think about things. It's not the only input. Maybe it's the most important input, but that's it. So when you study Muslims, you might say, well, look, there's a normative. One might tend to say, oh, well, Muslims do things this way. That must mean that it's tied to their faith. Well, not necessarily, 1. 2, that there might be many other exigencies and contingencies for which their behavior can be moral or not moral. All right? Okay. Then you have this idea of applied Islamic bioethics research, which our initiative tries to do to be in between these sorts of areas, between Islamic and Muslim bioethics. And we want to examine the ways in which the material of Islamic bioethics is understood and applied by consumers, right? So you're doing a sociological study. At the same time, you're examining the translation of biomedical concepts into the edifice of Islamic law. So you're thinking about how scholars think about medicine, right? What is their conceptualization of medicine itself, the science of medicine, the knowledge bases of medicine, the practice of medicine? So that's how I would consider applied Islamic bioethics research. Okay, so we're going to stop, unfortunately, there. Do you have some slides? You can stand up for a couple of minutes. If you want to get some coffee, that's fine, but I will turn over the field to Sheikh Jawad. Jazakallah khair.